The Supreme Court has just concluded oral arguments in a case which could see Roe v. Wade overturned. 12 states have what are called trigger laws, that the moment Roe v. Wade is overturned, they will ban abortion. There are many speculating that as soon as it happens, many other states will also ban abortion, and there will be a hard divide between red states and blue states as to whether or not they will allow abortion. Now, following the oral arguments, the consensus seems to be Roe v. Wade will be overturned. The decision may come in spring, but many personalities on the left are saying that's it. It's over. We've lost. One guy from Slate, a reporter, a writer, actually tweeted out Roe v. Wade will be overturned in June of 2022. And a lot of people thought it was a statement of fact when he was just saying no, just based on the arguments. This is the case. In fact, NBC News reported, based on the arguments from the conservative justices, they seem to be leaning towards overturning Roe v. Wade. Now, there's a lot of implications here. For one, there's culture war implications. There's also medical privacy implications because Roe v. Wade enshrined our right to medical privacy, or I should say the ruling protected our right to privacy on medical issues from the government. The issue here for me is fat load of good, that's done. Vaccine passports, COVID passports, they've been pushing them all over the place, mandating you to reveal your private medical history to get into a public accommodation. And this is being done through government. So while many have made that argument, I'm not sure it's strong enough right now because it seems like, well, medical privacy isn't an issue regardless of what the Supreme Court has actually said. But this could lead to a major moral crisis in this country. You know, I've talked about civil war. Many others have as well. We have an article from Forbes. A billionaire has warned something civil war-like is coming in the next 5 years. And the collapse isn't just going to be financial. And of course, I agree. And I don't agree simply because one day I woke up and thought so. It's because I've been reading the news and listening to experts who have made such predictions. Now, I've long thought about this. The other day, we were talking with Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire, and he said he doesn't think it could happen because there's not a geographical dividing line like we had before. But that's an American perspective. Many civil wars have occurred throughout history that didn't have geographic dividing lines, and there were different factions all over the place, and they'd fight. But the one thing we did have in the 1860s was a strong moral stance on issues. Now, a lot of people might tell you that you'll hear a lot of arguments that the Civil War wasn't really about slavery. It was about states' rights. I mean, that's technically true. States' rights was a big issue. But the funny question is a state's right to do what? The principal catalyst, of course, was slavery. There were a lot of other issues. And of course, many states seceded from the Union, which they argued their right to do. And then a war broke out. What you need to understand about the Civil War is that in the North, people here, they weren't fighting simply because they were like, don't you try and leave the Union. They were fighting because they were like, yo, slavery is evil. It's evil. We've long emerged out of that idea, emerged away from that idea. It's archaic. It's wrong. It's a violation of rights. And Frederick Douglass made a profound statement when he challenged Americans to live up to the document they themselves created, that all men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So now I'll bring these ideas together. And what I mean is, if we get an end of Roe v. Wade and all the red states ban it and all the blue states don't, we will then have our strong moral divide. And I'm just going to say it. Look, first and foremost, you guys, you know that I lean pro-choice on this issue. And I'll explain in great detail as we get into all this stuff. But I certainly don't lean in the direction of where the modern left has gone because they're outright pro-abortion. But I can say this definitively. The pro-life stance is a strong moral stance. The pro-choice stance is not. Now, people who are pro-choice, for the most part, or pro-abortion, might just passively say, sure, why not? But the pro-life stance is very much adamant, meaning there are many people in the South who didn't care about slavery. They benefited from it. And there are people in the North who are willing to die to end it. People like Hans Christian Heg. Admittedly, don't know too much about him. But my understanding is he wasn't even American. They built a statue for him. Leftists tore it down. This is a guy he was an abolitionist. Abolitionists had strong moral positions on slavery. Not every person who fought in the war was an abolitionist. But what I'm saying is the people who oppose abortion view this as a moral imperative, something they must end. And the people who are pro-choice and pro-abortion are kind of just like, yeah, you know, I kind of lean towards or I believe in. But are they willing to actually die for it? I don't think so. But let's talk about these arguments and see what's going on. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member, and help support our work. As a member, you'll be funding our fierce and independent journalism, and we are about to hire a couple more journalists to do original reporting, social media work, and just write more breaking news. So we're expanding. Plus, we have many more shows coming, and it's expensive. When people don't sign up, we still produce this new content, and that just costs us money. So we're investing in this because we believe in it. Because it's more important to buy journalism, to fund good journalists, as opposed to getting a fancy new car or something like that. So the more you guys sign up to become members at timcast.com, the more we're just going to keep hiring people and expanding the business, building out new facilities, recording new shows, because that's what we believe in. You also get access to our exclusive members-only segments from all of our shows, including Timcast IRL and Tales from the Inverted World, so don't miss that. And don't forget, like this video right now, smash that subscribe button, and share this video. I don't got the marketing budget of CNN, and YouTube puts them on the front page. If you really want to help us out, share these videos. Let's read from the Hill. Supreme Court seems poised to consider new limits on rights to abortion. They say a majority of Supreme Court justices appeared poised to consider setting new limits on the right to abortion during oral arguments Wednesday over a Mississippi law that takes direct aim at the landmark decision Roe v. Wade. The Mississippi law at issue, which bans virtually all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, conflicts with the nearly 5-decade rule that says states cannot prohibit abortion prior to when a fetus can live outside the womb, known as fetal viability, which occurs at around 24 weeks. But on Wednesday, the court's conservatives, who constitute a 6-member majority on the bench, posed sharp questions about how firmly rooted Roe's viability standard is in the Constitution. If you think that the issue is one of choice, that women should have the choice to terminate their pregnancy, that supposes that there is a point at which they've had the fair choice, the opportunity of choice. And why would 15 weeks be an inappropriate line? Viability, it seems to me, doesn't have anything to do with choice. But if it really is an issue about choice, why is 15 weeks not enough time? Chief Justice Roberts asked, and I gotta admit, it's a really good point. The challenge is, what's being argued could overturn Roe v. Wade, and thus that argument is pointless. The argument, and this is the challenge of it, John Roberts makes an excellent point. If a woman has nearly 3 months to figure out if she's pregnant or not, then she has the choice to do so. And if she engages in, adult behaviors and then decides within a month to go get a test, that's only 4 weeks, and maybe the test comes back positive, she can go get tested again. I think it's a reasonable argument. The issue, however, is that if the argument is the right argument, well, then it actually ends up overturning Roe v. Wade and getting abortion banned outright. So the question doesn't become about choice. It becomes about, look, if we lose this case and you overturn Roe v. Wade, then women won't have the choice at all in large portions of this country. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not issuing a ruling on this. I'll get into my opinions in a second. I'm just pointing out this argument here, while I think is correct, may have greater implications. They say the scene of dueling pro and anti-abortion activists outside the Supreme Court on Wednesday underscored the enormous stakes and political gravity of a case that sits at the intersection of women's health and bodily autonomy, deeply held religious belief about the sanctity of human life, and the potential cost in the court's legitimacy if the justices depart from past abortion rulings that have been relied upon for generations. Roberts, along with fellow conservative Justice Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, are seen as key votes in the case that conservatives and anti-abortion activists see as their best chance in decades to undermine or even overrule Roe and related decisions. Kavanaugh asked multiple times why the court is better suited than Congress or the states to referee a highly divisive fight that pits the interests of pregnant people seeking abortion against the interests of fetal life. Quote, "One interest has to prevail over the other at any given point in time," Kavanaugh said to the U.S. Solicitor General, who argued against the law. "Why should this court be the arbiter rather than Congress, the state legislatures, state Supreme Courts, the people being able to resolve this? And there will be different answers in Mississippi than New York, different answers in Alabama than California, because there are two different interests at stake, and the people in those states might value those interests somewhat differently." Wow. Do I agree with Kavanaugh? And I think mostly on the issue of the gun question. New York has their view on guns makes no sense for me in West Virginia. Look, if we had a bear come on the porch in the middle of the night. What am I supposed to do if a bear breaks the door down, desperate, starving, and hungry because of the lockdowns? People aren't littering as much. There's less food. So a bear went and tried to rip open my chicken coop. This is a true story. What am I supposed to do? if we had New York-style laws in West Virginia. I get it. You live in New York. You're not worried about bears. I am. Your law makes no sense for me. More importantly, any law restricting the ownership and possession of guns, in my opinion, is unconstitutional. But in that capacity, I throw it back to this question about the Supreme Court and the Roe v. Wade. Brett Kavanaugh makes an excellent point, not about abortion, but about the right of states to decide what makes the most sense for them. I don't believe the Constitution enshrines the right to abortion. I think that's a silly political argument. However, I certainly do believe that the part of the Roe v. Wade that is correct is medical privacy, and that the government shouldn't play a role in when you go to your doctor and make a decision. So there are very serious challenges here when it comes to being pro-choice. Look, I don't like the idea of babies being aborted. I don't. I oppose that. The challenge, however, is that I don't believe a woman who goes to the doctor and finds out something should have to then get approval from the government to get a medical treatment. I don't believe the government should be able to mandate medical testing. I take issue with it. The same. It's the same with the COVID passports. I don't think the government has a right to be like, show me your papers, please. And then a woman goes to the doctor and she has an ectopic pregnancy or something like that. And they say, great, well, we can deal with this, but you got to go get approval from the government. No dice. In which case, pro-choice. But when it comes to this argument about 15 weeks, then I don't have any argument against that. I mean, to be completely honest. Let's get into the moral questions in a second. I want to keep reading the news before I go off on my positions. They say the 2018 Mississippi law, which has been paused during litigation, is just one of hundreds of abortion measures that states' legislatures passed recently, many with the explicit goal of overturning Roe. The uptick in state abortion restrictions coincided with the Supreme Court's rightward shift that now includes 3 nominees from President Trump. Justice Sotomayor, one of the court's more liberal members, said on Wednesday that the court's reputation would suffer great damage if the justices were to uphold Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban. Such a decision, she suggested, would be viewed merely as reflecting in the court's now lopsided conservative majority composition, which I think is not an argument. The legitimacy of the court is irrelevant. The court exists. They issue rulings. Their rulings are or are not, period. If you want to play politics, run for office. In fact, Sotomayor's statement just backs up what Kavanaugh said. This should go before Congress. And I think so. This is what the federal government is for. If you want a national ban on abortion, Congress should weigh in on it. The House and the Senate. Quote, will this institution survive the stench that this creates in the public perception that the Constitution and its readings are just political acts? She asked Mississippi Solicitor General. I don't see how it's possible. Well, here's from NBC News. A majority of the court's conservative justices suggested they were prepared to discard the court's previous standard that prevented states from banning abortion. Here we go. Check out this one from The Guardian. Kavanaugh signals support for curbing abortion rights. We scroll down a little bit, and let me see if this guy's tweet is still here. We have this from Mark Joseph Stern. He tweeted, the case is submitted. The Supreme Court will overturn Roe v. Wade in June 2022. Half the states will have complete or near total bans on abortion within the 6 months. Wow. You know, when I saw that, I thought it was definitive. I thought he was saying, like, they literally said, it's done. We get it. No. He issued a correction, but I think his sentiment stands. I think we understand it. He says too many people interpreted this tweet as a statement of fact rather than a prediction. Understandably so, I've deleted it. I should have said clearly that it was my best guess, not a certainty, and that's on me. I believe Mark is correct. Now, Mark is a writer for Slate. Obviously, I'm not a big fan, but I believe he is correct. Or I should put it this way. Based on the readings from the left and the right and the media's assessment, it seems like there is a strong possibility that come the spring, the Supreme Court will overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, there's some serious ramifications people need to understand. But let's take a look at some another statement. Let's take a look at some arguments. Lawrence Hurley said Supreme Court abortion arguments have concluded. It seems conservative justices have the votes to uphold Mississippi's 15-week ban, but the question is how far will they go in either gutting or completely overturning Roe v. Wade? Now, I don't know how they can do something other than overturn it or don't. That's a challenge. And Roberts' argument stands. You know, I look at this and I say, I think there's a challenge in, well, let's put it this way. We'll start getting a little bit into my politics, but then I'll get more in depth in a second because I got some more articles. But you have another life. You have 2 lives. You have the woman, you have the baby. At a certain point, there could be issues. And I don't like the idea that there are people who just use abortion as a form of contraception. I think that's wrong. However, I also don't like the idea of the government saying, papers, please. Oh, you want to get a medical procedure? Get approval from the government. That's, to me, very worrying. But at a certain point about viability, there's an interesting point. The rights of the fetus now are in play, in which case, if you want to terminate a life, then perhaps there should be some consultation with the authority that prevents the killing of individuals. In which case, it's always seemed rather reasonable to me that we have safe, legal, and rare, that there are circumstances where we say the government shouldn't intervene, but when the fetus is viable, well, now you have a question of aborting it stops the right to life of this individual. Granted, I understand it's a fetus, but the argument that it's not alive is insane. In which case, if they can deliver the baby and it can survive, then why terminate it? Why kill it? It's a tough question. I'm not going to pretend to be a scientist or a doctor, but I certainly think that it's reasonable to give someone 3 months, no questions asked, right to make, these decisions for themselves without government intervention. And then once the viability comes in play, now you are seeking a request from the government to get permission to terminate a life. That's mostly my position on this. And again, rather pro-choice. So I'm not entirely convinced overturning Roe v. Wade will be good. Okay, but let's read this. This is interesting. From the National Review. Pro-abortion attorney fudges facts on international abortion. An interesting point was made. During the morning's oral arguments in Dobbs v. Jackson, Justice Roberts asked Julia Rickleman, one of the attorneys arguing against the Mississippi ban on abortion, about U.S. abortion policy compared to the rest of the world. Roberts noted that the U.S. is one of only 7 countries to allow abortion after 20 weeks and pointed out that most European countries limit abortion far earlier. In response, Rickleman alleged this wasn't true and claimed that Roberts was incorrect to say U.S. abortion policy is extreme compared to the rest of the world. She argued most of Europe allows abortion until viability. This is untrue. Nearly every European country that allows abortion at all limits it to the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, and a handful allow it to 15 weeks. They do not, as Rickleman suggested, allow abortion after that point for broad social reasons. Meanwhile, Roberts was correct. The U.S. is only one of 7 countries, along with North Korea, China, Vietnam, Canada, Singapore, and the Netherlands, to allow abortion for 20 weeks. It's telling that Rickleman refused to respond honestly. To do so would have exposed how beyond the pale her side's argument really is. Well, I don't completely agree with that last point, but I certainly believe there's challenges because there's no middle ground here. I don't think anybody's arguing for pro-choice. The left has consistently argued for abortion to viability. Abortion to birth. I mean, this happened in Virginia, with the governor famously saying we would deliver the baby, it would be kept comfortable, and the mother and the doctor would make a decision. That to me sounds insane. But I think Roberts made a very, very good argument. You see, one of the things the left has routinely brought up about 16-week abortion bans is that they've said women don't even know they're pregnant at this point. Okay, I'm listening. Well, Roberts brings up other countries. The United States is not Europe. What's your argument? Oh, your argument is that in Europe, they allow abortion for 12 weeks in many countries, and women seem to be able to work that system feasibly and fine. If that's the case, it's not about the country implementing it. It's about the fact that individual women in this country will still be able to choose to get a no strings attached to no explanation abortion. I don't understand. I feel like the left has actually put Roe v. Wade at risk by trying to argue something that's a losing argument. Mississippi was saying 15 weeks. They said, we're going to challenge that in court. Did they not expect the Supreme Court with a conservative majority may actually overturn Roe v. Wade outright if you argue this? You could have let the law go and said, well, it's still better than Europe. Perhaps you lose some ground, but losing Roe v. Wade, in my opinion, is actually potentially bad. Let me show you this article and explain. From the Des Moines Register. Overturning Roe v. Wade could have unpredictable consequences for privacy rights. They say, perhaps the co won't overturn Roe, whatever. This article is from 2019. They say the Supreme Court decision finding a right to privacy arose in a 1965 case involving the right of a married couple to use contraception called Griswold v. Connecticut. But the right has become responsible for court decisions supporting adults' right to intimacy, gay marriage, and the rights of parents to make family decisions, such as whether their children are homeschooled or go to religious school. The right to privacy also supports an adult's right to decide about their medical care. This medical care also implicates the right and autonomy of the physically disabled. We get it. The concept of a right to privacy goes back to a Harvard Law Review article in 1890. Now, I don't want to get into too much about this, but suffice it to say This was very much a big part of Roe v. Wade. They say there are two main perspectives on how the court might overturn Roe. Some argue the court could eventually negate the abortion right alone, but keep privacy alive in other areas. They argue that abortion is unique because the state has a special interest in protecting the fetus, which I believe is true. This seems like a narrow ruling. Yet this is not so simple, as the court would inevitably have to undermine its prior decisions extending the privacy right beyond Griswold and Roe. Thus, one cannot presume that even this narrow reversal of Roe would guarantee the privacy rights application to the areas mentioned earlier. Now, look, I like medical privacy. I think it's very important. I don't like the government saying papers, please. I believe that there is a reasonable ground here that, a long time ago, a couple decades ago, we all kind of begrudgingly agreed to. Safe, legal, and rare. Well, it turns out that wasn't true. I believe the overwhelming majority, like 99% of abortions, are for no reason. Some people go in and say medical emergency. They'll say, potential fetus viability, threat of from the mother, rape, incest, etc. Now what we're finding out is they don't give a reason. They say, just don't want it. And that to me is sad. It's very sad. And it's an overtly negative consequence of saying people have a right to privacy between their doctor and them. And therein lies the very difficult political position of how much power you want to extend to the government. Ben Shapiro makes a very good argument, a very compelling argument, that the government, if anything else, has a duty to protect life. We enshrine the powers of law enforcement in murder investigations and preventing death, and the military, and even going out and taking life. And if that's one thing we know they do, well, then in the issue of abortion, there should be intervention. But my issue then is mostly about medical privacy. And I do face a very serious ethical conundrum in that there are people who have overwhelmingly exploited that system. There's no middle ground. There's none. I can tell you, though, the battle has been completely divided between pro-life, pro-choice, and then the absolutely absurd pro-abortion. This is true. We saw that comedian on Netflix. She did that special. Michelle Wolf was her name. Everybody gets abortions. Woo. We heard Lena Dunham say she wished she had an abortion. That kind of stuff horrifies, for me and personally, but also just everyone I've known growing up. I can't believe some people have actually adopted this view. I believe it was Phil Labonte of All That Remains who tweeted, if there's one issue that's going to create a very severe dividing line between, politically moderate leftists and the left, it's this issue. Because Tulsi Gabbard comes out and says, safe, legal, rare. I agree. And then the right says pro-life. And I say, well, we can compromise. And we say, okay, fine, 15 weeks. And we say, I hear the arguments, safe, legal, and rare. We don't like the abuse, but we do think it's a private medical decision and there's very serious issues. So let's negotiate. But now you have pro-abortion people. You had women. Take a look at this. Protesters allegedly take abortion pills outside Supreme Court ahead of blockbuster case. I don't know if they actually took abortion pills, but the idea that they would claim to and the potential that they did. I mean, that's to me, that's insane. So let's go to the Civil War question. Whether or not we will actually face something. I saw this story. It's interesting. It's from just the other day. Ray Dalio says America's decline will upend lives, not just portfolio. And he's not just talking about a financial crash. Dalio believes there's a 30% chance the U.S. will enter into a major civil war type conflict within the next 5 years. While other countries face similar challenges, America looks especially vulnerable. Quote, it's very important that we deal with this now. We can have a type of civil war or international war based on how we are behaving with each other and our financial conditions. What's more, the U.S. is not alone in facing this dire scenario. Dalio has built his business and net worth, which Forbes estimates at roughly $20 billion, on figuring out where the world's going and designing investment strategies to profit from it. This guy, he makes predictions. He makes money off those predictions. $20 billion. It's a heck of a lot of money. He's saying a 1/3 chance that we're going to enter into some kind of civil war type conflict. I hear him. I agree. Now, here's the big question. The moral divide. As I was mentioning with Phil Labonte, I find myself more in agreement with conservatives and pro-lifers than I do the far left and the establishment left that have gone full pro-abortion. When Northam in Virginia came out and said, what we would do is the baby would be delivered and kept comfortable, and then the mother and the doctor would make a decision. And I'm like, what does that mean? I don't care how you want to interpret it. Some people said it means a baby with severe mental or health defects. And I'm like, I don't care. Are you talking about a baby with a medical condition and you decide to kill it? I don't know, man. I don't know. I certainly understand the challenges that these people would face, but the problem to me there is a slippery slope about who we then get to determine gets to live or die. And that's scary. It really is. So I hear that, and I find myself I'm closer in agreement as a moderate to the right, pro-choice moderate to conservatives on pro-life than I am to the left. And so I'll make this point. Seamus, good friend of the show, he's been on the show multiple times. We've argued and debated pro-life versus pro-choice. And I think, we agree on a lot. And I was trying to say, dude, I think we agree on almost all of this. And he doesn't want to, because he's just like, no matter what, it's wrong. They're terminating a life. And I'm like, I agree that it's wrong, but I don't like the government coming in. So he actually made a sketch on his show, Freedom Tunes, about politically pro-choice, which was critical of a lot of my positions. I can accept that. I have no problem accepting my positions are very difficult to maintain morally because of the challenges of navigating this space. There's like no middle ground. And I don't have an answer other than what I've said. I had a good conversation with Glenn Beck, pro-life, and we ended shaking hands saying, wow, we don't know. We disagree completely, but how do we solve? Don't know. But that's the thing. My position on this is very sympathetic and understanding of the pro-life argument and the great arguments. And then I just come into the challenge of how much authority we grant the government over our private medical decisions. And if we grant that right to the government to take away our privacy, how long until they say, hey, look, you overturned Roe v. Wade. We're doing vaccine passports. We have a right to know about any medical procedure you're doing. What if you then want to go in for anything else that's deemed morally questionable and the government's like, we're going to intervene in that surgery because it uses stem cells? What if they were going to intervene because it uses radiation and it could potentially cause harm? I always say it. Your medical decisions are between you and your doctor. It's fairly consistent. For me, I completely 100% recognize the ethical nightmare that is of people abusing the system to use abortion as contraception. And then I'm like, that's bad. We shouldn't tolerate that. What do we do? I don't know. Because then what? People have to submit paperwork to justify their medical procedures? Dude, no, man. This is tough, right? It really is. I'm not going to pretend I have the answers. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend to be pro-life because, a lot of people who watch my show are pro-life. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend to be a conservative because I have conservatives who watch the show. I'm going to stand by what I think is right, even if you think it's wrong. But I'll absolutely have that conversation, and I will do my best to represent your position, those who disagree with me, to the best of my abilities. It's all we can really do. In the end, I'll tell you this. I get accused of bias. I get accused of clickbait. I get accused of all that nonsense. The Hill, NBC, Slate reporters, all saying the Supreme Court seems poised to restrict abortion rights and maybe even overturn Roe v. Wade. I mean, the Slate guy said it outright as a prediction. And when I put up headlines like this, they're like, Tim's biased and making clickbait. I'm like, I'll tell you this. I think it's fair to say that what I choose to report has that impact, 100%. But this is happening. This is reality. And I'll point out one other thing. This is from Reuters. When Reuters writes their article that conservatives signal support for abortion limits, they include a paragraph in this article that should not be here. Reuters is supposed to be news, and they write at the end of this article, if Roe were overturned or limited, large swaths of America could return to an era in which women who want to end a pregnancy face the choice of undergoing potentially dangerous illegal abortions, traveling long distances to a state where the procedure remains legal and available, or buying abortion pills online. The procedure would remain legal in liberal-leaning states, with 15 having laws to protect abortion rights. I read that and I was like, why is that in the article? A lot of things could happen. You could write, if Roe were overturned or limited, large swaths of America could return to an era in which fetuses were protected and life is cherished, and that people rejoice under the rainbows. You can write anything you want about what might happen. Why is Reuters opining on the nightmare scenario? Honestly, because the media is biased. And I think we all know it. And this is the inherent challenge. If you don't come out overtly saying that, it's a nightmare scenario and conservatives are evil, they'll call you right wing. I just try to say that, people are people. Some people are NPCs. Some people are discerning. Some people have moral opinions I don't agree with on the left and the right. And for that, they will smear me. And they'll smear you. because you're either in with their narrative or you're not. I'm curious as to what will happen. But the reason I bring up the Civil War scenario, again, just to reiterate as we kind of wrap these things up, this is a strong moral question. And the right absolutely is steadfast. And the left isn't. Now, they go out and they'll joke and they'll say women's rights and all that stuff, but they haven't been strongly following this for the most part. I do not believe the left will be willing to engage in conflict over this, but the right would be. I suppose the issue then is if the Supreme Court overturns Roe and all the red states ban abortion, but the blue states decide to keep it legal, how long until it goes to Congress? And the red states and the red tsunami say we are going to federally ban abortion now, and the blue states say no. And then the blue states, once again, the Democrats, find themselves on the losing side of a moral federal question. That's what happened in the Civil War. The Democrats were the ones who wanted the slaves, and the Republican Party was formed, I believe, basically around slavery. Abraham Lincoln, the party of Lincoln, said we're not going to allow this anymore. It'd be really funny if there's a red tsunami in 2022. Roe v. Wade was overturned. Blue states are allowing unrestricted abortion, and then the House and the Senate, with the red wave, pass a federal abortion ban. What will the blue states do? I don't know, man. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Come hang out live, and we'll see you all then.